Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Sorry for the delay. I'm just sitting up now. We'll be starting in a minute. Honey, I'm on air. Stop. Stop talking. Okay, sorry about that. So, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to episode 54 of the Paranormal Encyclopedia. Tonight might be a little controversial. We're going to be talking about Adolf Hitler. Specifically, I'm going to be talking about his religious beliefs, what most people think he was, what I think he actually was, and the general historical debate on that there is on the subject. So, most people, I think most people I've talked to at least, seem to be of the impression that Adolf Hitler was Catholic. So was he actually Catholic? Did he say he was Catholic? Did he actually believe something else? See, this is really interesting. We know for a fact he was raised Roman Catholic. And he went through, his first communion, he went through his confirmation. But there's a couple of things with that. First, after he left home at 18, there is no evidence of him regularly attending Mass anywhere. 1904, he was, according to at least one source, Toland, when he had his confirmation ceremony in 1904 at Linden's Cathedral, his sponsor said that he nearly had to drag the words out of him, almost as if the whole confirmation was repugnant to him. According to Heinrich Hoffmann, the strongly anti-Semitic Hernamite Catholic priest Bernard Stimpfel, at least one very anti-Semitic priest, but Bernard Stimpfel was a member of Hitler's inner circle during the 20s. So, yeah, he was raised Catholic. There's no denying this fact. His parents were Catholic. He went through a Catholic life. He went through confirmation, although the evidence says he did not want to be confirmed. He just basically went through the motions, and then when he left home, he stopped going to Catholic Church entirely. There is no evidence of him doing so. He did still talk about being Christian, sort of. But specifically, he claimed to have been a member of a Christian movement that had been popular in the 19th century and in the earlier part of the 20th century, known as positive Christianity. It claims to be Christian. It claims to follow the teachings of Jesus Christ, but it's kind of a build your own Christianity, since positive Christianity rejects the entire Bible. Old Testament, New Testament, it says it's all wrong. And why is it all wrong? Well, positive Christianity is a very strongly anti-Semitic movement. Its claim is the Bible was corrupted by the Jews. Jesus himself, despite what the Bible clearly says on the subject, was not Jewish. And therefore, since they thought, Germany particularly thought it was Aryan, Nazi Germany, I should say, excuse me. That doesn't really work with the Bible, which clearly lays out two different genealogies that both say he was not only Jewish, but a descendant of King David and King Solomon, the two great kings of the Jews. That said, again, publicly he made a number of comments. For example, in 1928, He said, we tolerate no one in our ranks who attacks the ideas of Christianity. In fact, our movement is Christian. In Mein Kampf, he wrote, the political leader should not estimate the worth of a religion by taking some of its shortcomings into account, but he should ask himself, will there be any practical substitute in a view which is demonstrably better until such a substitute be available, only fools and criminals would think of abolishing existing religion. And he wrote as well, hence today I believe I am acting in accordance with the will of the Almighty Creator by defending myself against the Jew. I am fighting for the work of the Lord. So publicly, he was very much about he very much said that he was Christian. And publicly, again, he was definitely anti-atheists. He spoke out against them. There was some persecution of them. On the other hand, privately is a different issue. A bunch of the inner circle said otherwise. The book Table Talk, which contains a bunch of transcripts, monologues delivered by Hitler, transcribed between 41 and 44, recorded by Henry Picker and Martin Bormann, and published under a number of editors and titles in 3 different languages. Bormann was Hitler's private secretary, who's the one who actually convinced him, a group of hand-picked officers, to record in shorthand his private conversations for posterity. And here you find some very different comments privately made. Hold on, just... He advocated social Darwinism, which is not evolution, despite some Christians have claimed. It was more of the idea of evolution on a social level with society, and it is not in any way accurate to say that it's normal evolution. You have Joseph Goebbels, who was the very important figure in the Nazi Party, who wrote in December 28, 1939, the Fuhrer passionately rejects any thought of founding a religion. He has no intention of becoming a priest. His sole exclusive role is that of a politician. But Goebbels also made a few other comments. We do know that Hitler insisted that high-ranking Nazis remain part of the church. We're going to be getting to the relationship of the Catholic Church to the Nazi Party in time. Another quote from Goebbels, also December 29, 1939. The Führer is deeply religious, though completely anti-Christian. He views Christianity as a symptom of decay. Rightly so, it is a branch of the Jewish race. This can be seen in the similarity of their religious rites. Both Judaism and Christianity have no point of contact to their animal element, and thus in the end they will be destroyed. The Führer is a convinced vegetarian on principle. He was a vegetarian. We know that he was a vegetarian. It is thought that it was more because of the advice of his doctors than any confirmed moral belief. Um, you'll also find if you do some research online, there's this, particularly among atheists, there's this, and some Christians, particularly that have an issue with Christianity, there's this confirmed Hitler was a Catholic belief. It doesn't hold up. He may have been some form of, you could argue that he was some form of Christian, but he did send Catholics to the concentration camps. Um, he definitely seems not to have been Catholic. In fact, I'm going to propose that he wasn't religious at all. So another common thing that I want to address and dismiss, is the idea that he was pagan. Hitler, now we know, again, based on history, the Nazi Party used elements and symbolism from Teutonic myth. And of course, German myth is. Yes, Serenity, we'll be getting to Maximilian later once I start talking about the Catholic Church's relationship with the Nazi movement. Right now, I'm trying to deal specifically with Adolf Hitler. But specific train of thought. Okay, yeah. So this idea that he was a pagan and he worshipped Norse gods. There's some evidence Himmler and the occultism in the Nazi Party is a whole other thing we're going to get into. I'm still working on the research that's going to take us. There's a lot of myth and nonsense in the subject, and it's trying to sort through it to what's factually reliable, and that's very difficult. But that said, I don't think it's not really accurate to say that he was pagan or that he was trying to set up. Certainly, he wasn't trying to set up paganism as a new religion for Nazi Germany, just by virtue of the fact that he saw it as a failed doctrine. The Norse pagans and Germanic pagans had their chance. They were defeated by Christianity. He wasn't going to try and set up an old belief to replace Christianity. He arguably was trying to set up a new one. All of that being said, so yeah, he used the symbols, he used the myths, he used the operas of Richard Wagner. He used all the symbolism in his rise to power, and he talked frequently, very publicly, about being Christian. I would argue he's not Christian. He's not a pagan. The argument Christians frequently make is, of course, that he was an atheist. I would say that's wrong as well. So here's the thing. There's a prayer that's been found. Let me look it up, and I'll even try and read the exact prayer. There was a prayer that was given out to the Hitler Youth. There are people that grew up in Germany that remembered this prayer. Hans Herder, who grew up Christian in Germany during the Second World War, talks about it. It wasn't a prayer to Jesus Christ. It wasn't a prayer to God, to God in any Christian or other sense. Trying to see if I can find the actual prayer. Okay, I'm having trouble finding the actual prayer. The bottom line here, though, is it's a prayer that was given to the Hitler Youth, distributed in German um, elementary schools. But it was dedicated to Hitler himself. It wasn't dedicated to God, it wasn't dedicated to Jesus. He had people praying to him. School children, members of the Hitler Youth, being told that they had to pray to Adolf Hitler. Christians don't do that. It's insane. The idea of doing that to someone who's claiming to be Christian should be insane. Unless there's an idea I'm getting to. There's a similar prayer that gets across the point I'm making. Protect our Lord with strength of hand, our people and our fatherland. Allow upon our leaders' course to shine your mercy and your grace. Awaken in our hearts anew our German bloodline, loyalty, and strength. And allow us strong and pure to be your German youth. I've seen another one that's more direct. But again, and there's also evidence, and there's a number of historians that think in the long term, what he wanted wasn't setting up Christianity as a state religion in Germany. Most likely, it's thought that what he actually was trying to do was set up a situation similar to what you found in the Soviet Union at the time under Joseph Stalin himself, definitely an atheist, where the roles and the purposes that the church served in people's lives were observed by the state. Here's the other piece to the puzzle that builds what I'm about to propose. It's fair to say, I think, from a psychiatric perspective, that Hitler was a sociopath and a psychopath. If you look at studies of sociopaths and psychopaths, they're not. Most of them profess to be Christian. Publicly, because it helps them blend in. Particularly if you look at not Germany in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, the people living there were predominantly Christian. If you'd come out and suggested what I'm about to suggest publicly right off of the bat, people would have thought he was insane. Well, he wasn't. Nobody would have followed him. He would have had uprisings. He would have had outrage. He couldn't do that. So to blend in, to gather the acceptance of the National Socialist Party around him, and to set himself out as popular enough that he was ultimately named the Grand Chancellor of Germany and able to eventually essentially seize control of the country, he had to blend in. So what I propose instead is that, like other sociopaths and psychopaths, Hitler's perceived as was what's technically called an autotheist. He saw himself as divine. He saw himself as a messianic figure. I believe in the long term he would have gradually, had he won the war, diverted attention away from the church towards himself. I think that's where his ego was inevitably leading. I don't believe he was an atheist. I don't believe he was a Christian. I don't believe he was... and related to this, I want to talk very briefly for a second about the idea that Hitler himself was some practitioner of the occult or a member of the Thule Society. I have never seen convincing evidence that Hitler was in any way an occultist. Several members of his inner circle had connections to the Thule Society. Um, and there's another one called the Aristophacy, which also probably played an influential role in some of his confidants. But as far as we know, based on public and private statements, Hitler was very materialistic. He didn't believe in magic. He was very openly dismissive of Heinrich Himmler, whose belief in the occult, which is sort of makes it ironic that he left Himmler in charge of something as important as the SS. Even people popularly think he was big into astrology. He wasn't. He was a here and now, physical world kind of guy. He didn't believe in magic. He didn't believe in he didn't profess a belief in anything other than God in terms of supernatural or preternatural forces. There is, of course, a school of thought, particularly in recent years. The Catholic Church has talked about this, that he was demonically possessed. I believe that was true. Father Joe, my mentor, one of his teachers, had an opportunity to look over some of Hitler's private correspondence. This teacher had training in psychiatry and was also trained in exorcism and the signs of demonic possession, and said, yeah, this guy was possessed. There's discussions of from someone who knew him in childhood, who claimed to have that Hitler talked as if there was another person. The way he talked, it was like something else was speaking through him. I've talked before about how your you don't have to practice the occult to have a demon. People who get involved, who are violent or destructive, or commit grievous sins, and yeah, Hitler fits all of those. Obviously, nobody's going to sit here and claim that a man who ordered the death of somewhere between 9 and 12 million people was a kind and non-violent person, at least no sane person. Let me see, what's the name? Because I was just reading about this. But I was reading something from a book by a friend of his when he was a young man, which is where it specifically speaks about this other force speaking through Hitler. But I'm not trying to. And here's the other thing. Well, yes, I do believe he was possessed. I believe the Bible talks about the spirit of Antichrist. The man declared war on the chosen people of God. I think that's a pretty apt description of him. I wouldn't necessarily go so. Other people I've seen have gone so far as to claim that he was possessed by Satan himself. I'm not inclined to agree. Mostly because if you actually look at a lot of the things Hitler did, he wasn't the brightest of people. But he made a lot of... my co-host, who's still not with us, of course, has made the comment before, and I tend to agree with him, that Hitler was the best friend the Allied powers ever had, just because of the tactically boneheaded moves he made, especially late in the war, which I suppose arguably could be because Satan, left him because he realized it was a lost cause. But that's the thing there. I don't think that. I don't think it was Satan. I think it was one of the higher-ranking devils who apparently didn't know a whole lot about how to properly conduct war. And there's certainly some evidence, even aside from the letters from this. If you do a little digging, um, Hitler had an ability to escape death that borders on Wile E. Coyote levels of wait, why did he survive that? Um, there's one of the better known examples is, of course, the what's the name of the plot? Happened very late in his war. It was done by actually members of by not high-ranking Nazis. It's Operation Valkyrie. I think Task Force Valkyrie is the name of the movie. But basically, they set an explosive underneath his chair, or underneath the conference table he was having a meeting at. It should have killed him. But so just before the meeting, somebody moved the explosive, and when it went off, it killed every other person in the room except him. He survived. The July 20th plot that happened in 1944 is what I'm talking about. Everyone else died. He got away with it by the skin of his teeth. There was an example that happened in France. He was supposed to give a speech. And what happens? So a guy, and actually a member of the SS, set up an explosive underneath the podium. That's what I'm looking for. That Hitler was supposed to speak at, and he was going to set it off. So, the guy's got to go. The SS officer goes to the bathroom. And while he's in the bathroom, the door is locked. Oh, and Hitler, completely out of character, gives a very short, to the point speech, leaves, and the guy never gets a chance to blow it up. It's ridiculous. I mean, and there are more. You can look it up online. He gave a speech in July of 1932 to a bunch of people in Freiburg. Just after the speech, they threw stones at his car. One of the stones hit him in the head, otherwise he was fine. When he was driving in a Jeep, Jeep's ambushed. All the other people in the Jeep shot. He survived again and again and again and again, over and over and over again. People kept trying to kill the man, and by the dumbest of luck, he survived. It's downright bizarre. There's, of course, also the open question of what the heck happened to him in the end. Anyway, since we don't know, a couple of SS officers who were present all said he committed suicide. What's the name of the group? But basically, one of the higher ranking intelligence agencies in the Soviet Union says he was committed suicide. But the remains that for years everybody thought was his was in fact not. Though frankly, I think he probably was. I think one of two things happened. I think he was either in fact did commit suicide, like the petty SOB that he was. And no disrespect to anyone who's lost someone to suicide, but Hitler was a petty son of a bitch. As I've said before, and I stand by, there's really no low blows when it comes to this guy. And yet, I will never make light of his victims or the atrocities that happened under his reign. On the other hand, I think he's a very viable topic for making look stupid and make a fool of. But he definitely had a downright bizarre ability to survive. Was, do we know for certain he was possessed? No. I mean, but the Catholic Church at the time was convinced enough that they tried to perform an exorcism on him. Um, it was from a distance, and it didn't. They say it didn't work, but we do know that was true from records. It was also commented on by the now late Father Gabriel Armoth, who was the chief exorcist of Rome. But okay, so that's Hitler and his beliefs, and a little bit going into the future. We're going to start talking about the occultism that was and was present during among the Nazi Party, and there was some in the parts of that popular myth that are exactly that myth that didn't really happen, or at least were greatly exaggerated. Um, it's a really quite interesting topic, and there is a bunch of legitimate things that are pretty darn weird. But I want to, before we get into that, and tonight may be a fairly short episode just because of how late it is, I do want to talk about a belief that's become very popular lately, or I should say lately since the 80s, which is that not just was Hitler himself and his higher-ups Catholic, but the Roman Catholic Church was directly involved in the Holocaust. There's a book that came out called Hitler's Pope, talking specifically about Pope Pius XII. Well, here's the funny thing. Before I get into this, I talked if you go back to the episode about conspiracy theories, I talked about what's called active measures. Active measures were efforts by the Soviet Union to discredit the Western powers. They started a lot of rumors about the John F. Kennedy assassination, and attempt particularly to make the American people mistrust the CIA and Lyndon B. Johnson. They funded Vietnam War protests. They funded, they actually, to some extent, may have helped fund the civil rights movement. So they did something good. But they also were, the Roman Catholic Church has throughout its history been a major power in Europe, particularly Western Europe. Less so in the United States, mostly because we've historically been a predominantly Protestant country. But it was a big power. It was something that Stalin and most of the other Soviet Union's leaders saw as a problem. So active measures was engaged in spreading disinformation about it. And you don't take my word for it. Go ahead and look this stuff up. There are records supporting what I'm saying. But one of the things they did was spread a lot of the rumors that you now hear about how the Catholic Church worked with the Nazis. One of the biggest things you may have heard, is the Catholic Church never publicly denounced Germany. So I actually brought up, and I want to read a papal encyclical. This is an encyclical from Pope Pius XI. So encyclical Brennender Sorgen, my pronunciation's abysmal as always. Encyclical of Pope Pius XI on the Church and the German Reich, to the Venerable Brethren, the Archbishops and Bishops of Germany and other ordinaries, in peace and communion with the Apostolic See. Venerable Brethren, greetings and apostolic blessing. It is with deep anxiety and growing surprise that we have long been following the painful trials of the Church and the increasing vexations which afflict those who have remained loyal in heart and action in the midst of the people that once received from Saint Boniface the bright message of the gospel of Christ and God's kingdom. 2. And what representatives of the Venerable Episcopate who visited us in our sick room had to tell us, in truth, and duty bound, has not modified our feelings, to consoling and edifying information on the stand the faithful are making for their faith. They considered themselves bound, in spite of efforts to judge with moderation, and in spite of their own patriotic love, to add reports of things hard and unpleasant, After hearing their account, we could, in grateful acknowledgment to God, exclaim with the apostle of love, I have no greater grace than this, to hear that my children walk in truth. John 3:4. But the frankness indifferent in our apostolic charge and the determination to place before the Christian world the truth in all its reality prompt us to add, our pastoral heart knows no deeper pain, no disappointment more bitter, than to learn that many are straying from the path of truth. 3. When in 1933 we consented, venerable brethren, to open the negotiations for a concordant with the Reich government, proposed on the basis of a scheme of several years' standing, and then, to your unanimous satisfaction, we concluded negotiations by a solemn treaty, we were prompted by the desire, as it behooved us, to secure for Germany the freedom of the Church's beneficent mission and the salvation of souls in her care, as well as by the sincere wish to render the German people a service essential for its peaceful development and prosperity. Hence, despite many and grave misgivings, we then decided not to withhold our consent, for we wished to spare the faithful of Germany, as far as it was humanly possible, the trials and difficulties they would have had to face, given the circumstances, had the negotiations fallen through. It was by acts that we wished to make plain Christ's interests in being our sole object. The pacific and maternal hand of the Church would be extended to anyone who did not actually refuse it. 4. If, then, the tree of peace, which we planted on German soil with the purest intention, has not brought forth fruit, which in the interest of your people we have fondly hoped, no one in the world who has eyes to see or ears to hear will be able to blame the Church and honor her ahead. The experiences of the last years have fixed the responsibilities and laid bare intrigues, which from the outset only aimed at a war of extermination. In the furrows, where we tried to sow the seeds of sincere peace, other men, the enemy of the Holy Scripture, oversowed the cockle of distrust, unrest, hatred, defamation, of a determined hostility, overt or veiled, fed from many sources, and wielding many tools against Christ and His Church. They, and they alone, with their accomplices, silent or vociferous, are today responsible to the storm of religious war instead of the rainbow of peace black in German skies. This is long, so. 5. We have never ceased, venerable brethren, to represent to the responsible rulers of your country's destiny the consequences which would inevitably follow the protection and even the favor extended to such a policy. We have done everything in our power to defend the sacred pledge of the given word of honor against the theories and practices which it officially endorsed, would wreck every faith in treaties and make every signature worthless. Should the day ever come to place before the world the account of our efforts, every honest mind will see on which side to be found the promoters of peace, on which side its disturbers. Whoever had left his soul an atom of love for truth, and in his heart a shadow of a sense of justice, must admit that in the course of these anxious and trying years following upon the conclusion of the Concordant, every one of our words, every one of our acts, has been inspired by the binding law of treaties. At the same time, anyone must acknowledge, not without surprise and reprobation, how the other contradicting party emasculated the terms of the treaty, distorted their meaning, and eventually considered it its more or less official violation as a normal policy. The moderation we showed in spite of all this was not inspired by the motives of worldly interest, still less by unwarranted weakness, but merely by our anxiety not to draw out the wheat with the cockle, not to pronounce open judgment before the public was ready to see its force, not to impeach other people's honesty before the evidence of events should have torn the mask off the systematic hostility leveled at the church. Even now that a campaign against the confessional schools, which are guaranteed by the Concordant, and the destruction of the free election, where the Catholics have a right to their children's Catholic education, afford evidence in a matter so essential to the life of the Church, of the extreme gravity of the situation and the anxiety of every Christian conscience. Even now our responsibility for Christian souls induces us not to overlook the last possibilities, however slight, of return to fidelity to the treaties and to an arrangement that may be acceptable to the episcopate. We shall continue without failing to stand before the rulers of your people as the defender of violated rights and in obedience to our conscience and our pastoral mission, whether we be successful or not, to oppose the policy which seeks by open or secret means to strangle the rights guaranteed by a treaty. 6. Different, however, venerable brethren, is the purpose of this leisure. As you affectionately visited us in our illness, so also we turn to you, and through you, the German Catholics, who, like all suffering, afflicted children, are nearer to their Father's heart. At a time when your faith, like gold, is being tested in the fire of tribulation and persecution, when your religious freedom is beset on all sides, when lack of religious teaching and of normal defense is heavily weighing upon you, or on you, you have every right to words of truth and spiritual comfort from him whose first predecessor heard these words from the Lord. I have prayed for these, thy faith fail not, and thou, being once converted, confirm thy brethren. Luke 22:32. 7. Take care, venerable brethren, that above all, faith in God, first and irreplaceable foundation of all religion, be preserved in Germany pure and unstained. The believer in God, not he who utters the name in his speech, but he for whom the sacred word stands true and worthy concept of divinity, whoever identifies by pantheistic confusion God and the universe by either lowering God to the dimensions of the world or raising the world to the dimensions of God is not a believer of God. Whoever follows the so-called pre-Christian Germanic conception of substituting a dark and impersonal destiny for the personal God, denies thereby wisdom in the providence of God, who reaches from end to end mightily and ordereth all things sweetly. Wisdom 8:1. Neither is he a believer in God. 8. Whoever exalts race, or the people, or the state, or a particular form of state, or the dispositories of power, or any other fundamental value of the Christian community, however necessary and honorable be their function in worldly things, whoever raises these notions above their standard value and divinizes them to an idolatrous level, distorts and perverts an order of the world planned and created by God. He is far from the faith in God and from the concept of life which that faith upholds. Wow. Nine. Beware, brethren, of that growing abuse in speech as in writing of the name of God, as thought it were a meaningless label to be affixed to any creation, more or less arbitrary, of human speculation. Use your influence on the faithful that they refuse to yield to this aberration. Our God is the personal God, supernatural, omnipotent, infinitely perfect, one in the trinity of persons, tri-personal in the unity of divine essence, the creator of all existence, Lord, King, and ultimate consummator of the history of the world, who will not and cannot tolerate a rival God by his side. 10. This God, sovereign master, has issued commandments whose value is independent of time and space, country and race. As God's sun shines on every human face, so his law knows neither privilege nor exception. Rulers and subjects, crowned and uncrowned, rich and poor, are equally subject to his word. For the fullness of the Creator's right, there naturally arises the fullness of his right to be obeyed by individuals and communities, whoever they are. This obedience permeates all branches of his activity, in which moral values claim harmony with the law of God, and pervades all integration of the ever-changing laws of man into the immutable laws of God. It keeps going. I mean, I was going to read the entire thing, but there are 43 points here. I think it makes the point I'm trying to make pretty well, though. I mean, in what I've read so far, it's very clear he's condemning racism. He's condemning the Nazi Party's elevation of itself. It goes further to talk about an insane prophet. I'll put a link. If you want to read the whole thing, by all means, I encourage you to do so. Brennan, your search with burning concern is very important, though, because this was written specifically to address what Hitler and the Reich, the Third Reich, were doing. If there's any doubt about that whatsoever, let's be clear. In the entire history of the Roman Catholic Church, every papal encyclical ever written was written in Latin, with one exception. This is the one and only papal encyclical ever written in the almost 2,000-year history of the Catholic Church in a language other than Latin, and it was written in German. It's specifically calling out the Nazis. Now, this was not done by Pope Pius XII, who was the Pope during the World War II itself. It was done by his immediate predecessor, Pope Pius XI. But, here's the thing. At the time, Pope Pius XII, the man who would become Pope Pius XII, was of course a cardinal. He was a very important cardinal at that. In fact, to be specific, he was the Secretary of State to Pope Pius XI. When he was still Eugenio Maria Giuseppe Giovanni Pacelli. He was the Secretary of State to Pope Pius XI. He almost, without question, had a role in writing this encyclical. So when people claim the Catholic Church never spoke out about Hitler, never spoke out about the anti-Semitism, yeah, there you go. With burning concern. There's no mistaking who it was directed at. There's no mistaking what it's discussing. And there was real repercussions for the church. After this was written, Catholic priests were sent to concentration camps. Now, my fiancée, Serenity, pointed out St. Maximilian Kolbe, who we'll be getting to in a minute, because he factors rather importantly into this whole situation, in my opinion. But it's true, the Catholic Church did make a peace treaty with the Nazis for political reasons. It was not, and I think from what I've read already, and if you look it up and read the rest of it, it's pretty clear it was to protect Catholics within the Reich. It was not an endorsement of what the Nazis were doing. If you look at what the Catholics actually did during the Reich, They were actually fighting the Nazis in a number of important ways, and the center of it was the Vatican. Now, it is absolutely true. People talk about it, and it is absolutely true that there were Catholic priests and monks who sided with the Nazis, which is disgusting and despicable. Anyone who did, there's nothing more despicable. There's no denying that that was wrong. I'm not defending them, but the church as an organization, to say that it was working with the Nazis, the Vatican itself was not working with the Nazis. The evidence is quite significant. Um, in 1942, Pope Pius XII gave a Christmas address. Met 26 pages long, over 45 minutes. Talked about human rights and civil society, focusing on the principles rather than the particular facts. He did not address the perpetrators or the victims by name, nor did he mention Jews or anti-Semitism specifically. On the other hand, he stated humanity owes this vow to those who, hundreds of thousands, who without any fault on their part, sometimes only because of their nationality and race, have been consigned to death or to slow decline. It's 1942. It's hard to think he's not talking about the camps. He didn't address the Holocaust directly. He didn't address the Nazis directly, because there was also the harsh reality of Italy was under the control of Benito Mussolini, a fascist, a friend of Hitler's. Outright denouncement would have been very dangerous. On the other hand, there are other things that he did. For example, when the fascist government under Mussolini fired Jewish scholars who were working for the government, the Vatican gave them jobs. When the Nazis came to Italy and demanded a ransom in gold, or that all the Jews would be sent to the concentration camps, the Vatican offered to pay the gold when they came up short. Looking up more specifics. There's also a deal that I've heard described wrongly. That there was a deal cut between the Vatican and the government of Brazil, where Brazil agreed to take thousands of non-Aryan Catholics, issued visas to them, then turned around and refused to take them, because essentially they realized the ink on the baptismal certificates wasn't even dry. People have claimed that it was the Pope that backed out on the deal. No. It was Brazil. It was their government that refused to do it. The Catholic Church is, in fact, by a number of Jewish scholars as well, not just Catholics, or not even non-Catholic, other people that weren't directly involved, has been credited with saving more lives than any other private organization in the world. The chief rabbi of Rome, Israel Zoli, took refuge in the Vatican after the Nazi occupation of Rome in 1943. After the war, He converted to Catholicism, taking the name Eugenio to honor Pope Pius XII. September 21st, 1945, the General Secretary of the World Jewish Council, Dr. Leon Kubautsky, presented money to the Pope in recognition of the work of the Holy See, rescuing Jews from fascist and Nazi persecutions. There was even a movement relatively recently to add Pope Pius to the hold on, let me get the exact name of it so I don't mess it up. September 17th, 2009, Paved the Way Foundation nominated Pope Pius XII to be listed as righteous among the nations at Yad Vashem Holocaust Memorial. There's 3,000 original documents and photos of the life of Pius XII and his work to save the Jews during the Holocaust. There are a number of other heroes within the Catholic Church. Particularly, I want to talk about one of the most remarkable Catholic priests, I think, of the 20th century. Really, in fact, he was so recognized. He is the official patron saint of the 20th century, and he's seen both by myself personally and by the Catholic Church as a martyr for the faith. Saint Maximilian Kolbe. St. Maximilian Kolbe was a Catholic priest and a really quite fascinating and brave individual. He was a priest in Poland. Maximilian Maria Kolbe. He was a Franciscan friar specifically. He showed the signs of the stigmata. If memory serves, I may be off on that. No, wait, no, I'm off on that. I'm mixing people up. No. So Maximilian Kolbe was a Franciscan friar. He was, during the Vatican, or during the time he lived in Poland, his order hid 4,000 people from the whole 2,000 of whom were Jews, I might add, from the Nazis. They caught him. They caught him at it, and they sent him to Auschwitz. While in Auschwitz, now there was a policy at Auschwitz that if someone escaped one of the barracks, 10 random people from that barrack would be shot. So, at the end of July 1941, 3 prisoners vanished from the camp. SS Hauptmannsführer Karl Fritz, the deputy camp commander, picked 10 men to be starved to death in an underground bunker to deter further escape attempts. One of them was a guy by the name of Francis Gadrowinzek, who cried out, "My wife, my children," which led Kolbe to take the act that would get him named a martyr for the faith. He volunteered to take the man's place. And he kind of became a bit of a nightmare to the Nazis. What did he do? He led prisoners in prayers in prayer to the Our Lady. Each time the guards would check on him, he was standing or kneeling in the middle of the cell, looking calmly at those who entered 2 weeks of dehydration and starvation. He was the only one of the 10 that was still alive. So they wound up giving him injected of carbolic acid that should have been lethal. according to eyewitness reports, he supposedly raised his arm and just his left arm and waited for the injection. And then because that didn't really work either, they wound up cremating him, still alive, on August 15th, the feast day of the Assumption of Mary. Um, this guy, one thing that always bothers me is that he's been called anti-Semite. This got a lot of issues when he was named as a martyr and as a saint. Just because reality was he was a Roman Catholic priest. Um, Mostly he was trying to convert Jews. He did he did work to save them. I mean, his order, and he with him working as part of it, saved 2,000 people. Um, Most of the stuff's pointed at newspapers that he was involved with would write that printed articles about a Zionist plot for world domination. Um, and supposedly he was organizing mass propaganda for the Catholic Church with anti-Semitic and anti-Masonic edges. Others have pointed out that it was Judaism, anti-Semitism was a minor part of what he wrote about. This man did give his life to save another man. Because he saw it as the right thing to do this. The evidence that he was anti-Semitic is weak, I think, at best. And again, his order was hiding 2,000 Jews. There are Catholics that aided the Nazis. That's true. And it's estimated Jewish Virtual Library talks about it and say in the 860,000 lives saved. Um, just bear with me. The church made a concerted effort to save lives, led by the Pope. You can look it up. You can go to Jewish Virtual Library. You can see the estimates of how many Jews were saved by the Catholics. It's estimated that the Pope again, quoting from the Jewish Virtual Library, The vindication of Pope Pius XII has been established principally by Jewish writers and from Israeli archives. It is now established that the Pope supervised a rescue network which saved 860,000 Jewish lives, more than all of the international agencies put together. Do some homework. The reality is the Vatican did, there were Catholics that worked with the Nazis. There were Catholics within the Nazi Party. There's no denying that, nor am I trying to do so. But to say that the church colluded with the Nazis is not historically defendable. It didn't happen. And the main source of the idea that it did, again, the book Hitler's Pope, is largely drawing on anti-Catholic propaganda produced by the Soviets. The closest thing I've ever found to anything pro-Nazi definitively coming out of the church is the fact that after the war, the Catholic Church argued for life sentences as opposed to executions for Nazi war criminals. Given the church's traditional stance on capital punishment, that's really not. It's not really accurate to say that that's a support of the Nazis. We're going to get. I'm going to start wrapping. I'm going to be wrapping things up in a minute, just because it's late and I'm tired. Next week we'll be back to our regular time at 8 p.m. I just wanted to get something out because I don't want to skip a weekend if I can avoid it. But it is getting late. I am getting tired. I do have to work in the tomorrow. And I think this is a good starting point for the discussion, because we're looking. Like I said, we've talked about what role the Catholic Church played in the whole thing. We talked about my opinions of Hitler's beliefs, and certainly I'm not the only source out there, maybe not even the most credible source out there. Ken and I encourage you to go do research on your own and find the fact there are a lot of historical opinions on what his beliefs may or may not have been. Nobody's really sure. And he was an evil son of a bitch. I think that speaks for himself, and I think we can all agree with that. And the world's better off with him in his grave. We are going to start looking at the Nazis. I'm not sure if it's probably not going to be next week. One, I'm trying to line up a guest. Two, more practically, I need to do a lot of research, just because, as I've said already tonight, we know. I mean, Himmler had some really weird beliefs and practices. The SS had some very weird beliefs and practices. There was the Aneronby group within the SS, which were a group of, and I use the term loosely, archaeologists that tried to travel around, proving various ridiculous beliefs about the Aryan race. This, by the way, that group, Aneronby, is pretty much the inspiration for the Nazis in the Indiana Jones movies. And yes, they did go looking for Hollow Earth. They went looking for the Grail. They went looking for the Spear of Destiny, the Ark of the... there's even some evidence, though I'm running this down, that Hitler himself may have been interested in getting the Spear of Destiny, the spear that pierced the side of Christ. Although, again, arguably this is more as much for political reasons and symbolism as it would have been anything to do with any belief of a mystical power of these objects. There's definitely this belief in terms of what the Nazi archaeologists were doing. They were trying to justify all these idiotic beliefs they had about the Aryan race and how the Germanic people were these amazing supermen, which is all a load of horseshit. But and it's all going to justify these beliefs. Maybe how much it was based in actual belief in occultism is up for debate. But that's going to call it a night for this week. If you haven't checked it out yet, please check out latest episode of Forgotten Fairy Tale. I'm talking about the story of Robert Johnson, a great blues legend. But for all, now, that's it. I want to thank everybody for listening. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and have a good night, everyone.